So, Grace, I know you lost your grandfather to cancer, and that was one of the things that spurred your interest in this. But how did you, you must have been like a 17-year-old at this point, get access to the experts to try to start nailing some of this down?
Yeah, well, I always attribute like my whole research journey to the high school that I went to in Austin. It's an alternative-based education system where I had time in the mornings to do all my academics within 2 hours so that I could then open up my entire afternoon for this kind of research. And I mean, while my grandfather did kind of spark the passion for me, what really got me going is the fact that my generation is so clearly being targeted by these big food companies. It's not even funny. And it made me so angry that I just continued down this rabbit hole of research where I was reading these things that it's not that crazy to find. I mean, I'm no smarter than your other, average teenager. I just know how to use Google. So I was searching up these things, learning like, oh, great, Twinkies have the same chemical that's in Clorox, or, oh, the same amount of sugar in orange juice is actually equivalent to just drinking a bottle of Coke. It's those kinds of things where you're like, how have I been thinking so differently my whole life? And you realize, well, we've been lied to, and I really hate when people tell me like, well, technically it's everyone's choice if they want to eat a donut. It's not, it's just your fault. Like you teenagers, you just have terrible diets and y'all need to own up to it. But it's not your fault when the system is rigged against you. Like if we're playing the game of life, teenagers had a very late start and all these big food companies are just flat out cheating. So there's literally no way for us to go against this without trying to demand some change right now. And I mean, the only other time I've seen this in history is when you look at big tobacco. I always say that ultra processed foods are the new cigarette for my generation. And people, that really seems to trigger something within them because I think they know it's kind of true. And we now have research showing that the big tobacco industry actually bought big food companies like Kellogg's and General Mills I think it was General Mills and Kraft. And they used the same kind of tactics that they had deployed, with all of their tobacco industry product development for these foods. And then they just exited in 2001 and impacted literally every other big food company in the way that they develop their foods so that they're highly palatable and addicting. And they targeted kids, just like how with cigarettes, they would target kids by putting these signages saying, oh, go smoke a cig at children's eye level. Now they're just paying off dietitians on TikTok to promote cereal. So, I mean, it's the same thing. We're going through the same motions, but people don't want to accept it because that's freaking scary if it's as deeply entrenched within all this corruption as the whole tobacco scheme was, which I've found.
What's so really awful about comparing it to cigarettes is it's like ultra processed foods are your generation's cigarettes if in a world in which cigarettes were given to babies and toddlers and force fed to them in the lunchroom when they go to school and then again at night at the dinner table and were almost impossible to get around having. I mean, it's just, and this was one of the points that they were making. I think Callie Means raised this at the hearing, that especially if you're lower income or if you need government assistance on your lunch program, you are getting spoon-fed the most disgusting, harmful stuff on earth. The government pays for it, and no one gives a damn what's going to happen to you as you balloon in obesity and with disease. So it is a problem, not just for us grown-ups, but really for children all across the country.
Yes. No, it definitely is. And I think your point about us being given these as children, I mean, baby formula itself has these highly reactive, easily oxidized polyunsaturated fatty acids. Like that's the primary source of fat from seed oils within them. So we're giving these to babies. These fats get stored in our cell membranes. They wreak all sorts of havoc. And we're literally not even a year old. And then we're given the baby food, which is like, it's like the vape of cigarettes for ultra processed food. It's like, we're going to give them a little bit of a toned down version and it's still going to have added sugars, which by the way, like the amount of added sugars that an adolescent should have is 0 grams. And there's no getting around that. And they'll say, oh, it's okay to have a little. No, it's not. It's unacceptable. And the worst part is your brain is only 90% developed once you hit kindergarten. So this entire time period, their brains are barely even developed and they're being given these foods. Just think
Poisons.
about, I would love to see research on the way that their entire wiring of their neural networks is changing because these foods are so addicting that, I mean, they are raised by the foods themselves. It's terrifying.
The other thing is, and RFKJ was raising this, Vani, but and I confess I didn't know about this. I'm at the beginning of my whole journey on the lane that you ladies have been on, is glyphosate and how this product is all over, like everything we eat, any wheat product, any pasta. And he was making the point that it's one of the reasons why there's such a difference between the pasta we get at our grocery store and the ones you get when you go to Italy and have in a restaurant there, and the way you feel when it's done. But that stuff is over almost everything.
It is, and it's pervasive, and unfortunately, it's making its way into every single thing we eat. It's in wheat, it's in oats. You're finding it in all of major products like Cheerios, and it's becoming such an issue
a pesticide.
that, yes, correct. So it is the main chemical that is coupled with GMO seeds. So Monsanto, who created these patented seeds, corn, soy, canola, sugar beets, all of those seeds are able to withstand heavy doses of this chemical glyphosate. And that is really problematic because glyphosate has now been implicated to cause non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, bladder cancer, autoimmune disorders, leaky gut, fertility issues. There's so many things that can be linked back to the uses of glyphosate in our environment. And it's literally ending up in breast milk, in sperm, in our tissues, in our body. And so there's something that's got to be done. You know, back about 10 years ago, we started this huge campaign to label genetically engineered ingredients because of this widespread use of glyphosate. Before, when you looked at a package or a product, you couldn't turn it around and see that it was bioengineered to avoid some of these chemicals. Now you can, but it took a lot of work to get that done. And, you know, during that process, I was actually targeted by Monsanto and the other chemical companies in a widespread disinformation campaign as a food activist. And just on Friday, they released that there was a private social network actually being funded by taxpayer money to prevent and to downplay the risks of pesticides getting out to the public. The former communications director of Monsanto, now Bayer, was in charge of this, and they had profiles on any person that would speak out about these issues or wanted GMO labeling. You know, I protested in front of the Secretary of Agriculture under President Obama, Tom Vilsack, at the DNC about this issue, and they had a huge profile on me, including my parents' phone number and address, my address, you know, personal information to target me. And this is just coming out, and this just goes to show you how much they want to keep the public in the dark about these chemicals that are being sprayed on our food. And it's across the United States, where several other countries, again, in Europe and elsewhere, regulate these chemicals a lot differently. And that's one of the reasons why people always say, when I go to Europe, I feel so good eating their food, because it just has a tremendous less amount of chemicals than they do here in the United States on a day-to-day basis.
Thanks so much for watching. If you like what you just saw, hit the subscribe button for more clips and full episodes.